Man, welcome back to the Cool Table Live, listening to CJTM Met Radio in Toronto. Now, today we are joined by Toronto-based journalist Donald Higney. Donald Higney, formerly of The Score. Thank you for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
It has been a crazy year for basketball. We've been following it on the show. If you've been listening to the Cool Table every Wednesday, we've been trying to keep track of what's going on. This feels like the most Canadian finals we've ever had, even though there wasn't a Canadian team involved. There's so many Canadians on both teams. Pascal on the Pacers. I actually missed most of Game 7, so I was kind of learning what's going on from Twitter. Talk about your feelings after Game 7, everything being over with, because it's been a ride throughout the whole playoffs.
Absolutely. This is the first game seven we've had since 2016 in the NBA Finals. So we're talking about 9 years, 9 seasons where the series hasn't gone that long. And it really felt like a real slog to get here at this point the with the series going so long into the NBA calendar. We're at the end of June with the draft and free agency coming up. But specifically with game seven, there was so much anticipation built up around it. The Pacers win this dominant game six at home, and game sevens can go either way. There's now this new consensus we have going on where like game sevens are not actually typically the aesthetically pleasing games or the grimy, grinded out, like maybe you only win by a couple of points and you're missing a lot of shots. It's not like the beautiful basketball game that we know. It's just like who can salvage the most points, who's making the least amount of mistakes. And Tyrese Halliburton comes out firing, you know, although the Thunder end up winning and Shea wins Finals MVP, and everyone's very happy with, except Indiana fans and people rooting for the Pacers, are very happy that the Thunder win. What we learn more from this game, or what will stand out with me, is Tyrese, obviously, in that Achilles injury. You see it pop and him just writhing in pain on the ground, slamming the court. And he knows you can see it sometimes in players' faces when they know this is a serious injury. Lillard holding his calf after he tore his Achilles a couple months ago. The Jeremy Lin Brooklyn Nets injury, I always remember, even though it's an obscure injury from so long ago, but that almost derailed his career. And he holds his knee and he just says, "I'm done." And that's the predominant image for me, where you see Tyrese being held by James Johnson and support staff from the Pacers going off. And at the end of the game, he's in the tunnel waiting for all his teammates to come by, giving them hugs, giving them props, because the Pacers fought so hard and they almost made it a game. They're up in the second half, going into the second half. And the dam just kind of breaks for the Thunder. They hit some shots. Jalen Williams hit some big shots. Shea hit some big shots. They get their patented steals where they're just going to take the ball at all costs, all opportunity, and they end up pulling it out. And in props to them, they were the best team in the league this year, 68-14. You don't always see those teams. You see those teams come through in the end and win, but it was not an easy win to get to this point, even in the finals, with the Pacers taking them seven, the Nuggets taking them seven in the second round. Like, this was a very deserved win for the Pacers, or sorry, for the Thunder. And you hurt to see the Pacers kind of go down with Tyrese. The ship goes down with him getting injured at the end.
It was a roller coaster in so many ways. I think about two teams of the past because we're used to seeing a team this good just win. There isn't always those questions, but in the past, at least in our lifetime, the 67 win Spurs when Kawhi goes down, eventually comes to Toronto. That was a team that people thought could win a championship. And then the most famous one, the 73 and 9 Warriors not winning the championship. So we have those two recent examples of teams being this good and not winning, but most of the time, a team is this good, they win the championship. And then that last game is probably the most like lackluster game seven of a finals you could think of because of that injury that you mentioned. But there's two things that go into that is the Pacers had to come back so many times in the playoffs. Everyone has seen those graphics go around of the Pacers won all these games, being down eight, being down 10, being down more than that, and still coming back. So no matter how they were playing with Tyrese Halliburton on the floor, it felt like they had a chance. They could come back and win the game. So when he went out, I feel like that kind of hope left a lot of the fans. And then as well, probably two or three times in this playoff run, we kind of crowned the Thunder before their time. I think about the Minnesota series when everyone's like, Thunder going to walk to the finals. This is their championship. it's theirs to win. Even after game five, everyone's like, all right, they're going to close it in six. It's over with. So I think even that roller coaster of how many times we decided the Thunder were already champions before they had actually won, and it coming down to game seven, it almost was less dramatic than it seemed in the moment. But there were so many times that we decided, yep, they're already the champions. They've already won. I want to ask you about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Obviously, a Canadian boy, first Canadian to win Finals MVP. I was saying this to our mutual friend DeMar Grant that he's already a Hall of Famer. This season alone puts him in the Hall of Fame. That's rare for a player to kind of do all that at once. But what do you think about his run, and what will you remember the most from his season?
Honestly, what I will remember the most, and it's a very specific moment. I can't remember what game it was. It might have been game four in the NBA Finals, where he goes on that personal 15-point run to close it out in game four. When we look at this series and we look at maybe lost opportunities for the Pacers, game four is the game that kind of sticks out where, you know, you're at home, you're up a certain number of points, and Shea and the rest of the Thunder are not having a good game. This is your opportunity to go up 3-1 and, close it out either, game five in Oklahoma City, game six in Indiana. And Shea just takes matters into his own hands. And we were kind of looking for that signature run that players have. You think about Kawhi winning with the Raptors in 2019. You think about Giannis, you think about all these wonderful, like great players, and like they have their signature moments where they take matters into their own hands and they're like, I'm gonna do this myself. The team needs me, they have my back, and they fully trust me to do what I do best, which is put the ball in the basket, put the ball on the floor, score, use his wiry frame, get mismatches, get to the paint, and if the defense collapses, kick it out to the open shooter if it's there, or just use his size and his elusiveness to just get to the rim kind of at ease sometimes. I think that's what I'll remember the most about this run. And that's, MVP, conference finals MVP, finals MVP, like a true, like highly decorated season from maybe arguably now after this, the best Canadian player we've ever seen. There's still a lot of Steve Nash believers, and that's no discredit to Steve Nash. We needed Steve Nash to pave the way for the next generation, and then the next generation to pave the way for Shea. And now Shea is going to pave the next generation of Canadian basketball talent watching this finals run. So that's what I think I'll remember the most.
Yeah, to me, he was already ahead of Steve Nash before this, but you're right, this solidifies it. Like he had done something Steve Nash has not done. And before we talk about the playoffs as a whole and then going on to next season, I want to give some context for those who may not understand how great it is what he has done this season. Scoring champion, first team All NBA, MVP of the season, NBA champion, NBA Finals MVP. Only four players have ever done that in one season: Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Shaquille O'Neal, and Michael Jordan four times. So when you think about some of the players you named, Kawhi Leonard, Giannis, LeBron, Kobe, those guys have never done that before. So he's in a rarefied air and what he's accomplished this past season. Well, I want to talk about the playoffs as a whole because I always feel like we kind of get a snapshot of the next season by the playoffs. When it's done, sometimes you remember certain things and you forget. And I want to go back in time, okay? Walk with me here. We're going back in time to 2 seasons ago, okay? The Denver Nuggets won the championship, and everyone said their hardest season or hardest series was the Phoenix Suns. Now you look at the Phoenix Suns now, blowing up the team, nothing's happening with them, and it feels like it was so long ago where they took the Nuggets to 6 games, and it was like, look at the Suns next season. And I think about that all the time because in the playoffs, in the moment, you feel so strongly about a team. You think, oh my goodness, look how good they looked. Look how great they looked. And even this year with the Cavs were one of the favorites heading into the playoffs. Now, no one's choosing them to go far next season. They're not one of the top teams. So I think about those teams that we had such high hopes for them going in. Now we don't feel as good about them. The team I think about a lot is the Nuggets and subsequently the Clippers because the Clippers were one of the teams everyone was saying they're a dark horse. If they get past the first round, they could go far. I would say the Nuggets were still probably the Thunder's hardest series to me, also going 7 games. So I think if the Nuggets get, some reinforcements, better play from their support players, maybe they have a shot next year. But is there a team that sticks out to you that was not in the finals, but you're excited for them next season?
That's a great question. I would say if I'm the Timberwolves, I'm pretty happy with how this season went. For a large stretch of the regular season, I think they were seen as maybe a tier below some of the teams like in that kind of same group like the Warriors and the Lakers and the Nuggets and the Clippers. And to get past to kind of make LeBron and the Lakers look old in the first round, Julius Randle, this was a very important, like defining career playoff run for Julius Randle. Time will tell if that kind of excels and moves forward into the regular season, that he can kind of keep this momentum up. We've seen Julius Randle play well for large stretches and then kind of lose it going to a different destination, moving into the next season. But if I'm the Timberwolves, I'm very happy with how he played, and I'm trying to do my best to keep him. Or if he, because he has a very interesting decision with a player option, if he wants to opt in, opt out, test free agency. Um, but overall, if I'm the Timberwolves, I'm pretty happy with how the team operated. Also coming off the heels of trading Karl Anthony Towns, one of the most well-defined players in franchise history, number one pick, playoff runs, some disappointing playoff runs with Karl Anthony Towns in the mix. And you get two players in Randall and Dante DiVincenzo who really filled roles. It's almost one of those, and obviously Karl Anthony Towns played very well for the Knicks. They needed his size, and that got them to the conference finals, first conference finals appearance in 25 years, a very key, important piece. It's one of those rare win-win trades for both sides. But with the Timberwolves specifically, I feel pretty good where the team, if I were them, I would feel very good with how we played and how far we made it. Two back-to-back Western Conference Finals appearances, probably the most successful stretch in franchise history. They have some big questions coming up, like I said, with Randall. Nas Reed has the player option that he can decline. Nikhil Alexander Walker is a free agent, and they have all these young wings, Terrence Shannon Jr. that need minutes down the line. So I wonder if maybe they prioritize them over a player like Nikhil. But they're kind of at like a they're at an interesting place right now where they could make an argument and say we can run this team back and it could go very well. We know what the infrastructure is. We know how great Anthony Edwards is. He progressed his game into becoming one of the best three-point shooters in the league while still being this explosive, dynamic threat that will just, if you're in front of the rim, he's going to try and dunk your head off. But at the same time, it's like we know in the NBA, if you sit on your hands and you don't make improvements, the league can go by you very quickly. So they're in an interesting place. But if I'm them, I feel very happy with how this season went. And there's a lot of building blocks here that could further move into success uh, into the coming seasons.
I'm happy you brought up the Wolves 'cause I think the Wolves are such a good example of where the league is headed. I've said this over the past few years is before it was kind of you got to reach your prime, your late 20s before you can win a championship. That was always the case. 27, 28, that's when guys first get to that championship level. Steph Curry was 26 at his first championship, felt like an outlier. He had this great team, this great system. Since then, we've seen Giannis Antetokounmpo and Shea both win championships at 26. So it feels like the younger players are now getting to a place where they're maturing into championship level players a lot earlier. And I think Anthony Edwards is a great example of that because when they traded for Rudy Gobert, everyone's like, is that too early? Is that not the right timeline? And since he's gotten Rudy Gobert, they've made two conference finals. He's become an amazing three-point shooter, like you said. So I think that's what I'm interested to see going forward is all these younger players, like a Kate Cunningham, like a Paulo Banchero, decide, okay, I don't need to wait to compete. I'm good enough to compete right now. I think that leads right into the NBA draft. Now it's been interesting. Okay, for all the NBA fans, we know what happened a few months ago when Luka got traded from the Mavericks, and the NBA gods smiled on them and gave them the number one pick in the draft. Now, depending on who you root for, that may feel fair or unfair, but everyone knows Cooper Flag is going number one. It feels like we know what the Spurs are doing at number two with Dylan Harper. The big talk has been about Ace Bailey, him, declining workouts, not trying to go to certain workouts. He's the most interesting person to me in this draft. Seeing where he goes, one, I think is very interesting because I don't know if he's wrong. I think he may have something there in terms of wanting to control his future, get his reps, but he feels like the player with the most range and what he can become. I'm seeing people saying he can be the next T-Mac. I'm seeing people compare him to a Harrison Barnes type player. So he's all over the place in terms of what he can become. Is there a player or a team that intrigues you in the draft?
Yeah, I say like you going off of what you said, the Sixers at three kind of hold all the cards here because they could go for a player like Ace Bailey, who may or may not be thrilled to join a team with two injured stars that are growing older in years. But they could also go for a player like VJ Edgecombe, who would fit in the backcourt really well with Tyrese Maxey. He has these skills. He has this big, wide frame that's good on the defensive end. He has that Dwayne Wade come from behind block gene that we haven't seen since Wade retired. Shea gets there too, but Shea is a thinner player, but BK Edgecombe has some size to him, so that's kind of interesting in the backcourt. And his shot has improved over his collegiate season, so that could be an interesting way to go for them. They could trade back. They could get more assets. The Sixers are in such a precarious place right now with the state of Joel Embiid and Paul George. You have Tyrese Maxey and you have Jared McCain coming off an injury who showed a lot of promise before his season ended early. So the Sixers really at three, they kind of hold all the cards here. If like maybe there is a team that wants Ace Bailey and they have to trade up to three to get him, or maybe Ace falls, he goes past Charlotte, he goes past Washington, he goes past Brooklyn and New Orleans, and he slides. Or maybe their rumors are like maybe there is a team outside of the top 10 who's really enamored by Ace Bailey and they'll try to move up into the draft. That's not my own reporting, that's just rumors going along. But yeah, the Sixers and they're kind of they have a really big decision to make in terms of like the next 5 to 10 years of where the roster is going to go outside of Joel Embiid and Paul George. And you could get a very premium prospect at three. You could also trade down if you fancy yourself. It's like, we still like where this team is headed and see if there's someone else that you think is the better fit and recoup some of those assets back, build that war chest up again to like, maybe there's a player on a contract now, not a rookie that you want to trade for during the season. But I think if I'm them, I'm trying to pick the best player I can at three. If it's an Edgecombe, if it's a Bailey, if it's a Con Knipple from Duke, he would fit really well with his shooting and spacing. Joel Embiid has always thrived with players like Marco Bellinelli and JJ Redick who can shoot the lights out of the ball from three. It never hurts to have more shooting. Yeah, I would be interested to see what the Sixers do at three.
Yeah, the Sixers are the most interesting team to me in this draft because, first of all, three is such a high pick where you can get a star. They can still
Yeah.
get someone that they can pair with Tyrese Maxey, with Jared McCain. So they have that there. How much are they, including Joel Embiid in their plans of the future? Because
Mhm.
I've thought about them getting a center now. The top players are more wing and guards and centers. But I've thought about them. Maybe this is the time to get another big man, kind of as Joel Embiid insurance. Like, he's been one of the most injured players, as a star in the history of basketball, playing about 50% of his games over his career. Are they ready to do that and draft a center so high? My guess is probably not. My guess is probably not, but it's something to think about. And then talking about the offseason and going forward, I'm thinking about the number 10 pick. Of course, Phoenix was traded for it in the Kevin Durant trade. They got Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, 5 second-round picks, and the 10th pick. Now, they don't have a history of drafting well over the past few years, so I'm not I'm not confident in them. But I've thought a lot about these kind of late lottery and later picks in the draft because for some teams, those picks are valuable. I think about the Desmond Bain train that just happened. Is Desmond Bain was a 30th pick, and the picks that Orlando traded to Memphis are late first round picks. But if you're Memphis, you feel confident you can draft another Desmond Bain. That's kind of been your MO for the past 2 years. So I'm interested to see what Phoenix does with that 10 pick. They have 10 and 29. So I'm guessing they're going to try and package those together and get someone. But this offseason has been crazy already. Okay. Recently, a surprise to all of us, Drew Holiday got traded for Anthony Simons. Anthony Simons. I did not see that one coming. I was surprised by that completely. I was surprised that Portland was sending picks to Boston. That threw me for a loop as well. And then Drew Holiday being traded for someone as good as Anthony Simons. I've always used Boston as the organization I feel like is doing the best with the least. Getting Derek White for one pick, getting Porzingis from Marcus Smart and a couple picks. Like these are the kind of things that I think other organizations aren't doing with limited resources, but Boston somehow finds a way every single time. What was your first reaction when you saw that trade? Drew Holiday being moved after winning a second championship with the Boston Celtics.
I was not shocked that the Celtics wanted to trade Drew Holiday. The speculation has always been that Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis are the players that are going to be on their way out this season as Boston tries to lower its luxury tax bill. This is going to be a non-competitive championship season for them, obviously with Jason Tatum and his season-ending injury. Um, I was confused, or I was a little shocked that Portland ended up being the destination for Drew Holiday. But taking a step back, it makes a lot of sense that they would go for a player like Drew Holiday. The Blazers, shockingly, or kind of under wraps, they were one of the best defensive teams to end the season this year. And obviously, we know Drew Holiday is a very stout defender. Teams do extremely well when he's on the roster. They're way better. You think about the Pelicans and how they were able to squeeze out wins when it was just Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday as the main pieces on those rosters. I think that I believe Anthony Simons is on and expiring. He is eligible for an extension soon. I think for the Blazers, this is kind of a one for one trade. Obviously, Drew Holiday is on a big deal moving forward. But if you're ready for Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp to kind of take the keys, take the reins offensively, develop more. Shaden Sharp had a pretty good year. Take the take the keys and run. Let's see what they can do with the offense. Maybe you didn't want to pay Simons what he's looking for. Teams like Orlando made a lot of sense for Anthony Simons before they went for Desmond Bane. They're looking at guards, I believe, like Kobe White and Anthony Simons. So you kind of get a free year from the Celtics point of view of seeing, is Anthony Simons a player that we can maybe get on a reasonable deal? He's still pretty young, and we can fit him alongside with Tatum and Brown and Derek White moving forward. That's a pretty good four-man lineup right there. Now, who's the center, the big man, will remain to be seen if they end up moving Porzingis. Al Horford's getting up there in age as well. They don't really have like a bona fide center prospect on the roster ready to go to develop into that player. Or this could be a case where, you know, like you mentioned with Derek White, in that Derek White trade was Josh Richardson, and he had a very good start to the season, and they flipped him for Derek White. And Josh Richardson is still a valuable NBA contributor, but didn't have the same levels or highs that he did when he played for the Celtics for that small stretch of time. And you flip him for Derek White, who becomes another crazy development story, who obviously is very good with the Spurs, but then took another level to become this elite 3-and-D guard who can play
Borderline
make a little
all-star.
borderline all-star snub. So you have to look at it that perspective as well. It's like maybe Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla and the Celtics support staff can bring out another like Derek White Renaissance crazy development project with Anthony Simons.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of team building that the Celtics have done really well, is what you ask certain players to do. I think my example of this going wrong is DeJounte Murray with the Atlanta Hawks. Is he
Mhm.
was had so much on his plate in terms of being the leader on defense on the perimeter, still having to create, still having to score, that it's like he's, I think, better in a smaller role. Now, personally, of course, I'm interested to see what the Raptors are going to do. That's what my offseason watch because I think they have a great core of players already in terms of young guys, Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, who we haven't seen play a second yet for the Raptors. RJ Barrett had a career year last year. Emmanuel quickly still feels unproven, even though he's on this huge contract. But I think the idea of team building that they have going forward can fit almost any star that they plan to acquire. And of course, fingers crossed for Giannis. Every Raptors fan wants that. But I think they have a good setup because my philosophy of basketball has always been if you can have your lead playmaker and your leading scorer be two different players, you're in a good spot. Now, some guys who are the greats can do all of that, the Jokic's, the LeBrons, even the Shays. But most of the top guys are really good at one, like a Kevin Durant or a Kawhi Leonard. So if you can have someone like Scottie Barnes be your lead playmaker, and whatever star you get can be your leading scorer, then you have a recipe where everyone is asked to do a little bit less across the floor, and they can have a better floor game overall. So excited to see what the Raptors do. I personally don't think Giannis is going to happen. I think Giannis gives the energy of he's going to stay that extra year, and leave a little bit later, kind of like what Dame did with Portland. So that's the team that I'm paying attention to. And then in the West, it's the Nuggets. I mentioned them before. This is 2 years in a row now where Michael Porter Jr. had disappointed in the playoffs. Now, he had a decent run when they won the championship, but a lot of people have said that they have just an average shooter in that spot or an average, small forward in that spot, they probably win that series. And I agree with that. I think if they have someone in that spot who's more consistent, they'd probably do a lot better. So, do the Nuggets eventually move up Michael Porter Jr.? Of course, they loved him, drafted him even when he had back issues, gave him this huge contract when he was out for the season. So, they've been loyal to him this whole time. Does that loyalty remain? I want to see because I think if the Nuggets can make a big splashy move, they could be up there with OKC Thunder.
I agree. And it's important to note in terms of Michael Porter Jr. that he was dealing with a shoulder injury in the playoffs. That
Hmm.
was kind of something that was reported, and that obviously affected his ability to shoot. He shot 34%, which is below his career average. But Michael Porter Jr. has always been like the wild card contract of can we move him and get something better from that three spot, or are we comfortable with his shooting? He used to be a way better or way more impactful playmaker, like driving and collapsing the defense as well. Can he tap into that again and be a more dynamic option? Because when Michael Porter Jr. was coming into the league, we saw him as this player that could shoot, obviously at an extremely high level, but also create for himself. And sometimes with Jamal Murray, he has these nagging hamstring, lower body injuries that take him out of action for 6 weeks, or he isn't the same player because he's adjusting to it. And sometimes you need that third creator that can handle the ball and is creating from the perimeter, can get shots with ease. If Michael Porter Jr. can tap back into that, that is an extremely important card that the Nuggets can play. But if it's hard for him in maybe the dynamic of the offense with Jokic and Murray, and you don't get those opportunities when you're a well-oiled run machine with the Jokic and Murray two-man game, the spacers shooting, you know, you have to find a player that fits that model a little better, or still maybe Michael Porter Jr. Maybe they're still growing in that role for him to do. Like even though you won a championship and you were extremely successful and you needed him to win that championship, you know, teams grow and players grow, and sometimes the fit doesn't work anymore. So that's something that is interesting to see with his health. I would be surprised if they moved off him this season, but
Hmm.
definitely or this off season. But going into next season, like they have very limited resources to make moves. Um, they're almost at the section. I believe they're a luxury team. So they're what they can do to move players is extremely limited. They can't aggregate salaries and stuff like that. So they really have to hit on these mid-level guys with their tax pyramid level. Um, like they signed Westbrook, he declined his player option, so I don't know if he'll be back. He might be looking for more money somewhere else. It could happen, it could not. You never know. Um, a player like Bruce Brown, even though he was on the roster so many years ago and was an integral piece to that championship team, he probably makes sense again on that team. Knows the system, knows the coaches, knows the main players. Like he would be a good ad to get, but like what else can you get? They also need these young guys, the Strothers, the Pickett's, the Tysons, even the Peyton Watsons of the world to really show some growth. You have to hit on those draft picks. They have to be around, even though Peyton Watson was getting consistent minutes in the playoffs. They have to be contributing players, else they're just washes. They're lost opportunities.
Yeah, they need some of these guys to hit. I mostly have trusted them in their decisions, even though they've been, hugely unpopular. I think about the KCP move last year to lose him. Christian Brown was better than KCP last year. No one saw that coming. He was better than him throughout the year and even in the playoffs. Bruce Brown was on the Raptors for a short amount of time, didn't do much for our team. So I mostly have trusted them when it comes to these moves, but they need more. That is just goes beside the point. Now, this is the last thing before we wrap up here. The Thunder next year. Like we've talked about all the other teams, what they're doing. The Thunder next year, I'm assuming they're the favorite to win the championship next year. I will be choosing them as well. I have them in a tier on their own. But who do you think is their biggest challenger as of now? Of course, the offseason has just started. The draft is Wednesday night. So who do you think is their biggest competitor as of now?
Specifically in the West, I think you have to look at the Houston Rockets as a very big competitor to the Thunder. Definitely, I would not say that they were better, but getting a player of the stature of Kevin Durant into that existing ecosystem where they play almost as suffocating of a brand of defense as the Thunder play. Not quite, but they they love their defensive intensity. They play extremely hard on that level, and getting Kevin Durant and only giving up players like Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks, and you still have your main pieces in Amen Thompson and Şengün, and Fred VanVleet obviously has that team option, and I would assume it gets declined to sign a longer term deal at a lesser number. So it's a $40 million team option. So I doubt that gets picked up. I think that was always kind of the agreement of we give this a couple years and we see how we feel at the end, decline and extend on a shorter or a deal with less term. And getting Kevin Durant without giving up players like Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., Reed Shepherd, like you still have these young guys in place and you still have ability to make moves with mid-level to bolster this roster. Like they could be a challenge for the Thunder for sure. The Nuggets, obviously, as we've established, they went seven. They played a very tough and a hard series. It was probably the series where the Thunder had to grow the most, and they obviously did some growing in the finals as well throughout this whole playoff run. The team that started in the first round to the team that ended and winning the championship was obviously not the same team throughout the entire way. But the Nuggets, depending on the moves that they make, they can definitely be a competitor. But some of these teams, like one of the main takeaways that I've gotten from these playoffs is that the seed doesn't matter anymore in the NBA. You can have these you can have these teams that rest, but have these wonderful systems, these trusting each other that have been around for a while. The seeding really matters to the younger teams, like not necessarily the Thunder, but definitely like a team like the Rockets. Although they lost in seven to the Warriors, that was a very popular upset pick. They needed that regular season experience to come together and make it a series for them. So but now they're at the point where they have a better understanding of who they are as a team. So I'm sure they'll go all the way in to try as win as many regular season games as possible. We've seen teams do it all the time. The Knicks and Tom Thibodeau and their legendary status of playing his starters 40 minutes a night,
Yep.
41, 42, 43. I'm sure Ime Udoka will not go that far, but they will probably be another regular season wins machine with now a more patented brand of playoff basketball with this ultimate closer in Kevin Durant you have on the roster now. So I'd probably look at them too.
I think there's two other teams I want to mention before we wrap up here. And listen, we are naming all teams from the West. The East, we don't have a lot of faith in you guys. I'm sorry to say it. We're naming all teams from the West. I think the Clippers, they've been in a lot of trade rumors, which has surprised me. So if they get the right pieces, maybe they can add to what they already have and be a more formidable team. They were a deep team during the season. They have a lot of good players. So if they get the right people to add, that could be something. And then let's throw the wild card out there. The Los Angeles Lakers. Of course, how do we go this far without naming them? But they have Luka Doncic, they have LeBron James, they have Austin Reeves, who may be a great trade piece. I floated a trade out there, Austin Reeves for Derek White. Who says no? But I want to see if the Lakers can add enough to their team to make a run. Because once you have Luka and LeBron, you kind of always have to be in the running. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank everyone for listening this week on the Cool Table. Please let everyone know where they can follow you and stay in touch with all your future work.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Donald Higney. That's my username. That's where I spend a lot of my time and share a good amount of my work.
Man, appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, know yourself,
Thank you.
know your worth.